sort of.
Yeah, same here.
Can you hear my fan buzzing through my, it sounds like a rocket.
Everyone will get started in a couple minutes. We're just letting people filter into the room. Good evening. All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jackie from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're excited to host tonight's event with Kerri Arsenault, presenting her new book, Milltown. She will be talking with Ben Fountain, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Kerri and Ben and the team at St. Martin's for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces at the moment, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're incredibly grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started this evening. In your Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here, though, with the participants information on the bottom, and you can see a count of your fellow attendees on the bottom as well. You're welcome to post your comments and your thoughts in the chat as we're getting going. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. If you have specific questions you'd like to have answered by the author during our Q&A segment, please post those questions in the Q&A module. You can find it at the bottom of your screen by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A this evening, so we ask that's where you put them. Again, other comments are welcome in the chat, and love and praise for the authors. We're recording tonight's event, so look for the video or audio version on our social media channels later on. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Milltown, is available for sale from Greenlight. And it's a great way to show your support for both independent bookstores like Greenlight and for authors like Kerri. You can order online, like I just put it in the chat, on greenlightbookstore.com, or you can pick up at the store or for shipping in anywhere in the US. So we appreciate your support of again, bookstores and our author. So our interviewer for this evening is Ben Fountain. He is the author of the novel Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, the short story collection Brief Encounters with Che Guevara, and the nonfiction work Beautiful Country, Burn Again, Democracy, Rebellion, and Revolution. His work has received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction, the Penn Hemingway Award, the Los Angeles Book Prize for Fiction, and the Dun & Flaherty First Novel Award, and a Whiting Writings Award, and has been a finalist for the National Book Award. He lives in Dallas. He'll be speaking this evening with our featured author, Kerri Arsenault. She is a book critic, book editor at Orion Magazine, and a contributing editor at the Literary Hub. She's also a mentor for PEN America's Prison and Justice Writing Program. She's appeared on Greenlight Stage in the past as an interviewer, but this is the first time we've had the chance to host her to present her own book, so we're incredibly excited. Ben and Kerri, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Jackie. I am really excited to be doing this event with Kerri. I read this book in bound manuscript around the beginning of the year. I think there cannot be a more relevant book right now for our times, politically, environmentally, just in terms of class and economics. And I just think it's one of the big books of the year and probably one of the big books of the decade. So it's a real pleasure and an honor to be presenting this book. And it's a beautifully written book too. And we'll get into that as well. And I mean, just, it gets down into the real stuff of life as it's actually lived. And Kerri could have gone after one or two things in this book, but she went after everything. And it's a complex book in all the right ways. So Kerri, hats off to you. Would you just tell us a little bit about the book and how you came to write it?
Thanks, Ben. So happy to be here. Gonna make me cry. So Milltown, for those who don't know, is it's a narrative nonfiction book about a small paper town paper mill town in Rumford in Mexico, Maine, where for 3 generations my family worked. And examine, I think more broadly, the unbuilding of the American dream and the working class, the hazards of loving and leaving home, and the ambiguous nature of toxics and disease. And how I started this book began with a false document and sort of ends with a false document too. I had been doing genealogy research back in 2001 and saw my grandfather's obituary and his death certificate and found all kinds of information I had never known about him because he died when I was 2 or 3. And I wanted to find out a little more about him. So I wanted to find out where he lived. First of all, it was in Prince Edward Island, this little town. And I looked and looked for this town and I couldn't find it. So I decided to go to this town. So my father and I drove up to Prince Edward Island, and come to find out there was no town with that name. The document was wrong. And so I thought, what else is wrong in my family tree? And what else is wrong in documents that we think are supposed to be stable and true and real? And I think that's really what started me off down this crazy path.
And all right, why don't we, well, let me frame it this way. This is a mystery book, and not just one mystery, but 3 mysteries going on here. There's the scientific mystery of why so many people in the community of Mexico and Rumford, Maine, became sick with all these exotic kinds of cancers and died, so much so that it became known as Cancer Valley. So what was going on there, number 1? Number 2 is a human mystery, and that is, once people started to realize what was going on, why did they stay? And why did people continue to work at the mill? And then number 3 is the mystery of your family. Where do you come from? And what is it about your family and the Acadian community that makes you the way you are and makes your family the way you are? And any one of these could have been enough for a book, but you get all 3 in this book, and they all complement each other in this very genuine, wonderful way. And anyway, so let's start with this. What is smokestack money?
So the largest smokestack in our town was like a big giant middle finger in our town, really, is how I always saw it. But it was, that's where every time the smokestack was operating, that means the mill was working, and the mill operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except for shutdowns. I was talking about this with my husband the other day. It doesn't shut down. You can't just shut down like something over here and something. It's all very connected, which was interestingly sort of part of the structure of this book too. The mill is so connected to itself. You can't just stop one piece. So that mill was always operating 24/7, and it's what our town orbited around for income, but also at the beginning for everything. The owner of the mill, he built houses, he built banks, he built the library, he built roads, railroads. He did everything. He even gave people turkeys for Christmas one year. You know, the mill and the town and the people were so intertwined that it was impossible to extract them, and I think still is. And that smokestack was like that symbol of it. So when it was operating, that means the town was doing well. But as the town was doing well, it was also being polluted when the smokestack was operating. So yeah, it was, you could see, you know, I say this right in the beginning of the book, you could see the smokestack from anywhere in town. So it was like, it was also a constant reminder of that presence in our daily lives. It was like, I was gonna say it's like air, but it was like the opposite of air. It was both, you know, it was like you had to have it to exist.
Yeah, I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, and and my mother's family were farmers, and there was a Weyerhaeuser pulp mill about 10 miles east of my grandparents' farm. And when the wind was right, man, you could smell that pulp mill. And so would you describe, and I'm sure it's the same smell, would you describe that smell?
It's so funny because, well, we used to always say it smells like money, for one thing, but and it weirdly, to me, it's going to sound horrible, but it smells like home. My father would come home from work every night and smell like that, or every day. It's this mixture of like eggs and rotten eggs and rotten cauliflower, but also that like sort of that acid wood smell because of the wood chips going through. There was that constant smell. And when I drive into town and I still smell it, it's like, oh, I'm home. Like it's unpleasant, but at the same time, you know, smell is so intrinsic to memory that it's also hard to separate those two things. But I mean, kids would come to our town for sports teams and they'd be like, it smells like farts in your town. I mean, it smelled like farts, basically. I said farts twice.
All right, so Kerri, tell us about the bleach room at the mill.
So I've never been there. I would have liked to have gone. My grandfather worked there, and what happens in the bleach room is where the magic happens. It's where the pulp turns white, you know? And to do that, and at the beginning, our paper mill opened in 1901, I should say, and up until 1997, the process was basically the same. To bleach paper, they would use elemental chlorine to bleach it, and what happened in the combustion process of that, it would create this dangerous byproduct called a family of dioxins. I guess I could say dioxin just to make it simple, but it's a family of dioxins. And dioxins are one of the most dangerous toxics known to humankind. They were the thing that was used in Agent Orange and what, you know, was toxic in Love Canal and Times Beach, Missouri. Bigger disasters than we're talking here, but equally as nefarious. So in that bleach room, up until 1997, they used this elemental chlorine, and it created tons of dioxins that all over across the US and the world. And then they put in these regulations, so the mills had to change their bleaching process, and they changed it to elemental chlorine-free bleaching, which is not chlorine-free, it's just elemental chlorine-free. So it's like a trick of language, right? You know what I mean? So that created remarkably less dioxin, but still and that's what they're using today, and it still creates dioxins.
Okay, and when your grandfather and your grandfather's time, well, actually, as far as I can tell, all through the mill's operation, they would only put the old guys to work in the bleach room.
This is what I was told, yes.
And either you or your father thought for a long time it was because, well, you needed the most experienced people to work in the bleach room. But actually, that wasn't why they put the older guys in the bleach room.
Right. That was Dot Bernard. She told me that. She was a woman who worked in human resources there at the time. And she found out, she said, I figured it out. It was because they were closing in on retirement, so that when they retired, how am I going to say this? When they retired, they only would have like so many years left after, because most of them would get sick after working there, and they would only have a few years in which they would have to pay for their pensions and their retirements, and then they would just die. And that's what happened to my grandfather, actually. She said she figured it out. But if you look back, and I looked at, you know, that thing was in the death record. That was correct. He died of cancer.
In other words, the bleach room was so poisonous and so hazardous that basically those men were cannon fodder.
Yeah, they were just like treated like garbage. They were basically a recycling unit for industry, just like, you know, the river or the soil. They were treated like that. Just.
And you know, if you think about, okay, I mean, mill management knew what they were doing.
They did.
They were putting the old guys in the bleach room. I mean, I've got to believe, well, we'll get into that later. All right, flash forward to 2012, And we're coming out of the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. And the Kennebunk Journal, which is a newspaper in Maine, it has a story, and the headline is, "Some label toxin spike as positive. Pulp and paper industry says increase is a good sign. State officials not alarmed." In other words, the fact that toxics are going up, that's a great sign. I mean, it means the economy's coming back, and oh, well, probably people are going to get sick and die, but
it's funny. It's like that. Yeah, that smokestack is generating stuff. So
which also reminds me of the response, either tacit or overt, of a lot of elected officials with COVID. And the lieutenant governor here in Texas, Dan Patrick, he says, well, we should all go back to work, especially the older people. And if we get sick and die, well, there's no great loss. We are going to die anyway soon. And so, but basically, it's this view of human beings are cannon fodder for capitalism.
Right.
And one of the mysteries of the book is, why do people go along with it? Right? You talk about the Danbury shakes in this book, and that was, the mercury poisoning that hatters would get in Danbury, Connecticut.
Yeah, they were steeping the hat in the
right, from working with hats, and deadly conditions. And people would knowingly take those jobs and go in and work those jobs, knowing that it was going to kill them. And in fact, the New Jersey Bureau of Statistics and Labor said in one of their reports, the surprise is that men can be induced to work at all in such death-producing enclosures. It is hard to believe that men of ordinary intelligence could be so indifferent to the ordinary laws of health. Your book does a deep dive into this question and this mystery. And one of the parts you do quote a study about organizational silence in the workplace, both in the US and then another study in Europe. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the first thing I looked at was just the actual silence. Like, why didn't anybody say anything? Why didn't I say anything? I was 45 years old before I even started really thinking about this seriously. So I wanted to look at the actual silence. And that study said that some 80% of people that worked in a workplace, no matter what it was, a paper mill or an office or whatever, 80% of the people, if they saw something wrong at work, they would not say anything. And that was repeated in Europe. So the silence was like this. It was actually a mystery to the researchers too, because they were like, well, when the silence happened, they still couldn't figure out why it kept happening. Like, it just kept repeating itself over and over and over. I can't remember if they ever got to the bottom of that. So I started looking at the silence, and then I thought, well, okay, studies can only tell you so much. I'm going to go to this town. I'm going to go back home repeatedly and try to understand it. And at the same time, try to understand my own sort of complicity in it too. Why am I just, we joked about it, Cancer Valley, ha ha ha. Why didn't we take that seriously? But that's basically the whole thing of the book. It's so complex. Like, I think people do it every day. You go and you work at a place that could be dangerous. We make compromises about everything. And this, I think people are mistaken to think that this was a choice too. I had a lot of people ask me over the years working on this, why didn't they just leave or go get a job someplace else? But it's so complex. When, first of all, this is what they do. 3 generations of my family worked there. It's connected deeply to their identity. It's like, it's funny people don't think about a paper maker as an identity, but think about it like a lobsterman, right? Like, that's an identity, or fisherman or fireman. It's the same thing. It's still wrapped into their identity. Secondly, if you grew up working there, your father worked there, and it's not a lot, you didn't go get an education. It's a very isolated town. So there weren't a lot of job options. There was zero job. I mean, you taught skiing or you taught school or you worked in the hospital, but those took education. So the only thing you could do was work in the mill. And, you know, I think I also talked about this in that same chapter too, was it also provided, it was a great job. They made a lot of money there. You know, they did well for isolated, rural, you know, no higher education. They did really well, and sent me and my siblings, 5 of us, well, 4 of us, to college. You know, that was just my father on one income could do that, and, you know, clothe us and feed us and have a decent childhood. I mean, we had a happy childhood. So there's a lot of reasons, and, you know, and my mother repeatedly would say that, you know, it was a great life. We had a great life. So, you know, it's complicated when people say, was it worth it? I've had people ask me, was it worth it? That's like saying, you know, my father dies in the middle of me writing this book. He gets cancer and dies. That's not like a giveaway or anything. It's not a, but is it worth it for him to die? I don't know if that's answerable, you know, but I try to think of it as, did he have a choice too? You know, it's easy for us to sit in more privileged spots to say, well, they had a choice, but there's a lot of complicated things where they didn't really have a choice. It was more an inevitability. It was the Hobson's choice, as I talk about, you know, old man Hobson. I don't know if anybody knows this, but this is some myth. I don't know, maybe it's true, but Hobson had this stable of horses, and everybody would come in and they'd always choose the best horse to use, and that horse would get worn out. And finally he's like, okay, you have to choose this horse in the beginning of the row. You can't pick which, you know, because if you, and you would have to take that or leave it. It was kind of like a take it or leave it. And that's like our jobs, you know, it was take it or leave it. And leaving it was really hard with the money. And then your family lived there, your ancestors are buried there, your whatever. You know, some people just stay because of love, you know, which is, one person says that in the book. She's like, I stayed because of love. She can leave, but, you know, that's a very powerful thing. So,
you know, I think one of the great strengths of this book is it's kind of like Our Town, you know, the Thornton Wilder classic, in that you get so many voices and so many stories in this book. I mean, you go around and you talk to people, and you must be a very good interviewer. Well, I know you're engaging and you're sweet and you listen, but you get great stuff from these people. And so that alone would have been, you know, an oral history of this mill town would have been a fine book. That's only one aspect of your book, but I think it's a really strong aspect. And again, you're trying to get to the bottom of, you know, why would you stay in Cancer Valley? Yeah. You know, why would a family choose? Let's bring in another aspect of that, and that is the Acadian, you know, community, and the fact that, you know, you're of Acadian ancestry, and that particular cohort of people went through so much hardship, so much displacement, so much dispersion over, you know, starting in the 1750s, that, you know, do you think that had something to do with, you know, the stubbornness or the determination of your family and other families to stay in Mexico?
Yes. First to say, it's sort of connected with you talking about me interviewing people, but it was more like trying to just sit amid people and amid, I don't know what the right word is, but, and just be there, you know, and there were a lot of these people I knew. I think every main character in the book is somebody I knew. So I wasn't trying for some objective expose. I just wanted to really sit and understand. And if I understood them, I would understand me. And I think that was very similar to the Acadian situation. You know, I was like, we never learned anything about our Acadian history, even though more than half, probably our town was Acadian or Franco-American descent. Everybody, we never learned about it. So here I am, you know, 45 years old. I find this accidental error in the obituary of my grandfather, who's a naturalized citizen in America. He wasn't born here. So I also wanted to find out about these people too and understand not only who they were, but like what brought them to Maine and what, you know, what are the links of how is that past connected to the present day, to my present day life or to the present day life of this family, this town. And I do think that there are, there's some very nascent studies about, like there's this study in the Dutch 1940 famine. They looked at how certain genes were silenced and remained silenced. So back to silences again. And it caused negative health effects in people that suffered under this famine. So they're trying to look at how trauma can actually generate, some people are going to say that's like hokey pokey, but I don't know. I feel like there's something to that. And then I was talking to Joan Vermette. I don't know if she's on this call, but she's really a wonderful resource for me. She's just like really knowledgeable about Acadian and Franco-American history. But she was talking about the emotional transfer. And I was like, what does that mean? I love that term. But she said, well, you knew your great grandmother. And I did. And I remember a story. There's a story in the book that she tells me. And I knew her, and she was born in 1886. And she knew her great grandmother, who was born in 1865 or something, maybe even earlier. But so that's like almost 200 years of sort of emotional transfer, if you look at it that way. Does that make sense?
1765.
1760. Yeah, sorry, right. That wouldn't make sense. She would be like 2 years old when she had a baby. Yeah, so it's almost 200 years of emotion, which almost brings us back to the ethnic cleansing of Acadians, back, to the 1755 cleansing. So that trauma is not really that distant, if you look at it that way. I knew my great grandmother and she knew her great grandmother, and those stories traveled down, and some of the story, I don't mean stories, literal stories, but the emotional transfer can travel through. And I definitely felt that in my family. There was, it was a very strong feeling, but I just didn't understand what it meant, like, or where they were from or what this was all about. And I really didn't understand this Acadian history and what they went through until I started working on this book.
All right, they are, all right, just to talk about your family a little bit.
Go ahead.
There's some tough broads in your family. And so your grandmother.
Is that what you wanted me to say? Yeah, maybe. I'm a lot like my grandmother, maybe.
All right, your grandmother Bridget. All right, one day she's sitting there, and a bunch of you grandkids are around. And this is a quote, I'm quoting from the book. And she says to you guys, I love you all very much, but if I had it all to do over again, none of you would be here, she said, as a Virginia Slim seesawed on her lip. All right, well, that's information.
Yeah.
It is emotional information.
Right.
Yes, of course she loves you, but it's been a hard life.
Yeah, Yeah, she went through the Depression and World War II, and she was the same woman who taught me how to swim by just pushing me off the wharf. She's like, swim. That's how it was in our family, basically, literally and metaphorically, just pushing you out there and go, don't drown.
Now, there are, as I said at the beginning, there's wonderful writing in this book. It's wonderfully written throughout. But if I can, I want to read a fairly long paragraph about your mother.
Okay.
And talk about, tough women. It's about both your parents, but she has the starring role in this. My parents shaped their own well-worn paths. While my father walked back and forth across the footbridge to and from work, my mother lugged laundry up and down the cellar stairs day after day, one skinny arm cradling the laundry basket, her free hand gripping a Vantage, a cigarette brand whose packet featured a bullseye graphic. With a screech and a whack, the screen door would slam shut after she elbowed it open. She would dump clean laundry on the kitchen table, snap each article of clothing 3 times, fold them sharply into tight wedges of fabric, and stack them like the reams of white paper my father brought home from the mill. When the screen door wore out, my mother replaced it with a new one that came with a squeaky spring. She left it defective, announcing herself into infinity with only my father to hear. His hearing, long dulled by the hum of paper machines, was the perfect match to her perpetual clamor. My mother, she'd let her vantage expire before finishing it and send me to fetch her a new pack from the corner store. I'll time you, she'd say. Now go. And off I went. She didn't need to tell me twice. All right, that's damn good writing right there.
Thanks for reading it. That was interesting to hear.
It's a lovely passage.
It says a lot about her. I mean, she was an elbowy person a little bit, and she still is. She's out at all the Maine bookstores making sure they have my bookstore in stock. She emails me every day, updates.
Yeah, good for her. Well, she comes across very vividly and as a very strong person. You talk about sacrifice zones in the book, and these are, it's a term of art, designated areas in the U.S. that are next to, close by, environmentally dangerous, facilities. And people live in these zones, sacrifice zones. And so I just, just aside from the health effects, I mean, when you live in a sacrifice zone, when you know that you are cannon fodder, I mean, it's got to be, number one, a source of shame. And then, the defensive reaction to that will be pride.
Right.
Will be this kind of stubborn, yeah, I live here.
Right.
I'm that tough. This is me, this is my community, this is my identity. I mean, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that pride is one thing, laughter is another thing. There's a lot of humor in this town. Everybody's pretty damn funny.
Yeah, gallows humor, trench warfare humor.
That's me. And I don't know, it was interesting because I was on an event the other day. My cousin was there, and we grew up like brother and sister. And somebody said that. Somebody asked him about that. Why did you not question it? And there's sort of just this unasked question and unanswered thing. Is you just do it. You show up. It's like at some point, yes, they knew there were some people that said, there's a lot of cancer here, we have to do something, but all the studies would come out, indefinite, or government would be like, oh, the toxic spike is good, or whatever it was. So there's just this, I think I say this in the book, as a slow turnstile of resignation, right? It was just like, after a while, you just kind of like, okay, this is what it is. And you just sort of, it's like the dioxin right now. People are like, why are you talking about dioxin? That issue's dead. Everybody thinks that's gone. And it's because it was carefully and quietly put on a shelf. That's why. And I think that's what happens with some of these sacrifice zones. I think there's some people that are kind of shouting about it. And there's certainly Terry Martin and Doc Martin did stuff in our town, and other people too. And you try, but you just get beat up by it. And, I say this too, is who has time for this? I barely had time for it, and I worked on it for 10 years, and things I encountered were just, the material rained on my head. I got boxes, and even when I was in Texas, when I met you, I got 80 pounds of documents, like the last day I was there. My book was due the next day, and I was like, I have to look through this. So how does an ordinary person living in a sacrifice zone have the capacity, the time, the energy, especially if you're just trying to like feed your kids, or maybe even just find a stove, or like go to work? And in Maine, in this kind of Maine, there's no buses or transportation, and maybe you don't have a car, and so you have to walk. And so what job can you get where you can walk to work? And what if the snow is like spitting sleet in your face, and your kids need clothes? I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, 4 to 5 kids in this town are food insecure. So who the hell has time to worry about that, especially when you're getting a good paycheck?
There's, one of the great lines in your book is, who has the time to fight a mega corporation when you're making minimum wage?
Yeah.
And, or even if you aren't making minimum wage, I mean,
yeah, there's not just the mill workers. I should say that there's people living there besides the mill workers, right?
And so really, I mean, in an industrial capitalist society or post-industrial, where everything is so big and so complex, I mean, you know, where can individuals go to for protection, authority, for expertise? I mean, the only institution that would have the resources for that is the government. And so you spend lots and lots of time with the government regulations and then, you know, looking at what the mill discharged with reference to those regulations. And I mean, ultimately you come to the realization the mill usually follows the regulations. The rub is what is in the regulations and how did it get there and who determined, you know, the way it got written. And that's really where, you know, the smoking gun is.
Yeah, exactly. And to try to even understand those regulations, as you saw, it's impossible. I mean, you've been a lawyer. I worked as a paralegal. We're good readers of that kind of business. Like it was impossible. You know, it's just part of the same. It's all a metaphor for like who's living upstream and who's living downstream, right? If you're downstream, you're susceptible to the pollution and all the shit that's flowing downriver, you know, and the people that are making the regulations, they're all living upstream and not touched, you know, like it's.
Yeah. All right. Another great line, you know, which ties into this. All right. And I'm quoting, while studies or governments often determine risks for everyone, it should probably be up to the person facing the risk to determine its level of acceptability.
Yeah, I mean, sorry,
I was just going to say right on.
Yeah, I mean, this whole term body burden, right? I think, isn't that in the same section? It's the body burden is what the government tells us. They say, your body burden for this toxic is this. But and it's interesting because I only examined really dioxin, maybe mercury a little, maybe a little asbestos, because that's my father got sick from asbestos. But this is a body burden for one chemical. There's no studies that are saying, what are all these chemicals or these toxics doing to your body? So your body burden is the burden we bear because our government or our leaders or science won't bear it. So the body burden is literally that. It's a terrible term. I can't even believe it exists, but there it is. And we're bearing all these toxics where, like I said at the beginning, like even in the book, my father he has asbestosis and he gets diagnosed with lung cancer and esophageal cancer in 2013. And he has to get oxygen and he gets his oxygen measured all the time. He's got this tank in the other room and I feel like it's like so threatening. It's like ready to blow up all the time. It's like just another kind of fear that people are living under. I'm like, now he's living with the fear. I was terrified of staying there. I'm like, it's going to blow up. But so they would measure it and feed him oxygen. And I thought, oh my God, they're doing that to the river too. You know, our river had bubblers in it. And they would feed oxygen it to make it healthy, and they would measure the oxygen levels in the water. And I don't even know where I was going with that, but body burden, yeah. Body burden and environmental burden is very, you know, in line. It's not separate from that. And the people that aren't carrying those burdens, well, maybe they are, but they're not carrying those burdens as much as those people living in those zones. They're disenfranchised people who, whatever they are. A lot of them are working class. They're always more susceptible to injustices. It's, you know, and I think the thing that's most insidious about it is that it's a slow and attritional disaster. It's not a catastrophe, so it's really hard to get into the news. And, you know, this book is even getting out there slowly, equally. It's as slow as, you know, it's not what we think of as a disaster. You know, it's not even Love Canal. It's not that level of giganticism or whatever.
Yeah, it's structural violence. I mean, violence is being done to, you know, human bodies and in these communities especially. I want to read, I just have a list of some of my favorite lines here. And, and I mean, okay, so you're writing about is it Hortense, was she your?
She was my grandmother. I know it's all mixed family tree.
Right.
She was my actual grandmother, yes.
Hortense was a chain-smoking, sardonic woman with a face like a dormant volcano. All right, this is her husband, Frank. He was affectionate in his toothless smile, the way an octopus was, embracing his grandchildren with a manic, repulsive grip. All right. Okay, here's one that all New Englanders and especially Boston Red Sox fans will appreciate. Bucky fucking Dent.
Fucking Dent. That was his name growing up.
Yeah. For the 19th home run he hit in 1978 that knocked the Red Sox out of it was a one-game playoff. And
that's when I saw. I met him, like, it was not long after that. Maybe it was like 1980 was the first time I went to New York City, and I have a picture of him right over here somewhere.
Yeah.
My father had.
Right after your dad died, you're talking about the family. Grief sits on our shoulders like a nervous cat. And then during the union strike at the mill, Dick's Cafe vibrated with the broody rumble of the unemployed. And then in the hair salon, a sign pasted up on the mirror with a comb. It says, "This is a comb, not a magic wand."
That could have been the subtitle of the book.
Yeah, you lived in Curacao for a while, and so you're talking about the oil refinery there, and you have a sentence that reads, "Over the tiled rooftops of the candy-colored buildings, the oil refinery smokestacks snort off gases in fiery spasms in competition with the equatorial sunset." And then here's one of your relatives. He'd make an appearance at the dinner table every night, but even then he seemed to be elsewhere, the blank square in a game of Scrabble. And then here's your mother. She's on a roll. Her words like a blender on high with the cover off. All right.
That about most women in my family, perhaps.
Okay, we might get a little bit political here, Kerri. So, right, you I mean, one of the other alternative subtitles I proposed for this book was, let's see, where did I write that down? Okay, the subtitle of the book is Reckoning with What Remains. It could just as easily be The Screwing Over of the Working Class Who Followed All the Rules and Did Everything They Were Supposed to. And so you're writing about, how so many of your friends found Trump's election in 2016 to be this great surprise and a mystery. But to you, the only surprise you experienced was your surprise at their surprise.
Correct.
And you're writing about Trump, and you're writing about 40 years of broken promises and broken policies by both, across the political spectrum. And here you write, Trump, however, saw us, the working class. And even if he too was riding in a limo or using a gold leaf toilet, even if in the end he didn't provide what we needed, at least he stopped, opened his door, and said hello. I mean, Trump lies all the time.
Yeah.
But in 2016, he had one powerful truth in that campaign. He kept saying the system is rigged. That was a powerful truth, and it rang true to a lot of people in the country. So, the story of your family, your parents, is the story of the working class. People who did everything right, followed all the rules, worked hard, they were thrifty, they took care of their family, their communities, and then they get to the end of their lives and they're like a tetherball. They're right back where they started. So talk about those broken promises, those broken policies, and and you know, why people do what they do when it comes to politics.
Well, I should say I adapted some of that into an essay that just got published in the New York Review of Books too, my 86 jobs, which outlines the 86 jobs I've had. But I mean, I could say it started 40, 50 years ago, but I think it even may have started right when the mill opened. I mean, I tried to look at this American dream. Was that really such an actual truth? Was that a myth? You know, because I think you say this in your book, and I was just reading it tonight, that it wasn't necessarily that people were doing better because they were in the working class. Maybe you can correct me and say, but it was a structural, like everybody was doing better, right? Everybody was doing better at that time. So it wasn't just because they were hardworking. So, okay, so they're all doing better, but at the same time, you know, right from the get-go, they're getting poisoned, you know, so that's one thing. I mean, there's all this other stuff that accumulates. Again, this stuff accumulates just as bad as the dioxin in our bodies. You know, let's see, I think I started maybe in the 70s when I was born, you know, Milton Friedman, and the free market's gonna sort itself out, and Reagan's policies. And I go through this with the strike in our town. We had a terrible strike in our town that really tore our town apart and really made the mill workers be just, you know, not think that their company was loyal to them anymore, and they weren't. So there were things like that happened. There was, you know, recession after recession. And we always said that, I don't know if it's true, but I mean, I'm not an economist, but it seemed like it always hit our town first and left last. And sometimes just like lingered and lingered. And so pieces of it just still lingered and lingered. So, you know, we're going through the 70s and then the 80s with Reagan, you know, firing all the air traffic controllers. And then who comes along? Guys like, what's his name from General Electric?
Jack Welch.
So like, you know, just nobody cared anymore. It's just about the bottom line. And, you know, and mill workers felt that very acutely. I mean, I think it started with a strike, but then they, you know, their loyalties started to waver too. And also, I should say, our mill was owned by a man, and then his son, and then his son, and then it was a chemical company, and then a corporation, and then a conglomerate. Now it's owned by a Chinese company. So it's actually the arc of American manufacturing too. It just got so dispersed that like we were talking about early, the seats of power, the people who are running the industry aren't in the town. They don't give two rats' asses about the town. So they're, you know, they don't even know what's going on in this town. At least in Hugh Chisholm, when he founded it, he didn't live in the town either. Actually, nobody ever did, but at least he was there once in a while. But so fast, you know, keep going through the 90s, you've got, you know, the Berlin Wall coming down, and in our town was like, who cares? You know, there was such a bad it was a recession. I graduated from college right in the middle of it, 1990. And it was really bad. I couldn't get it. I tried to get a job there. I didn't even know where to work. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And then, you know, then my mother went back to work, you know, because my father's income, you know, inflation, his income wasn't enough, and it just kept getting worse. And then new people that started to work at the mill didn't have the pension that he was going to get or the health insurance. It just kept getting thinner and thinner and thinner, you know what I mean? And then Walmart moves in, and all the small businesses go away. It was just this, again, a slow disaster of, you know, maybe not slow in geological time, but slow over the last 100 years of people. So that when Trump shows up, and I should say this too, there's a piece I published in the Paris Review Daily today that talks about how we saw Trump. You know, when I went to New York City it was around the time you were going to New York City too, 78, was it? When you went? But yeah, you.
82.
Yeah, okay, so I was there around that same time, but like, first place we went was Trump Tower. It was like thing, you know, it's like we admired that kind of wealth. We didn't admire lawyers and doctors. We just admired that for a lot of complicated reasons. And Trump So then, you know, we had that sort of attraction to that tough talking, you know, money making thing. So when the 2016 election came up, plus he was like this master of sort of, I can't say he's a master of anything. So I'm just going to drop that. You can say it. You can say it.
He's a master of fantasy.
Fantasy, yes. And it's so weird. I have to say this to everybody. So I didn't read Ben's book until I was done with mine, this book that we're talking about a little bit, Beautiful Country, Burn Again. And there's so many parallels in our books. It scared me. My husband's like, you need to call him right away and tell him you didn't copy those lines in your book. But this drive towards, you know, 2016 election, so it got there, and it wasn't a surprise. He gave them some glimmer of hope, and it's not, and they were our town was the biggest Obama voter in the state, and then in the 2016 it was a complete flip. They were the biggest Trump voters because they were just, it wasn't against Obama or anything, it was just about, we need something, anything. They were desperate, and that's what they chose. They chose this guy who they thought was going to do something. They didn't care what, actually, just something. They're just tired of it, just the slow attritional violence happening to them. Is that what
I think
I could go on, but I won't.
Toward the end of the book, and it may be getting to the point where we stop and take questions, but I really want to get this in. Toward the end of the book, there's this lovely summing up of what you've done with the book. And I'm not sure you consciously intended that way, but this is really what you did with the book. I can find no smoking gun, no magic bullet, no conspiracy, no shroud of Turin to condemn or acquit the mill, my family, or the state or federal government. The truth, it seems, is not about hard evidence in your hand. It's about examining and poking at long-held beliefs in the portals of history and pushing back on them, like my ancestors pushed back the Akkadian tides with the palms of their hands. Right? That's a lovely passage. It's also, that's why we write. That's why we go after books like this. That's why we read books like this. The truth is complex. Human experience is complex. And I think it's only books like this that take deep dives into experience where we can get close to the truth. And often it is not satisfying in the way that a neat ending will be. But I think there is consolation and a lot of satisfaction in having a story authentically told that reflects the truth of the experience. And that's what this book is. So hats off to you. It's a lovely book.
Well, I think to comment on that, I think, you know, closure would be a complete lie. There is, for all these small towns, there's no Superman, there's no Aaron Brockovich, there's no, yeah, it would be a lie, and it would be untruthful, because it would also, everybody would think everything's okay, and it's not. It's definitely not.
I'm going to feel like I'm interrupting to ask a couple of questions from the audience that we've gotten to come in. Thank you both very much for flooring discussion, to be completely frank. I'm going to ask two questions on behalf of some of our participants. So the first one said, hi, Kerri. When I read excerpts from your book, which was incredible, by the way, I thought a lot about Terry Tempest Williams' Refuge, which is also a memoir of sorts, but also explores social and environmental issues from a local level that resonates to the wider world. Did Terry Tempest Williams have any impact on your writing?
No. I didn't read, I'm an accidental environmentalist. I mean, if I'm even an environmentalist, I don't know what I am. I haven't read any of the environmental literature that people would think I would have read. I haven't read any of it. I've just started to read it. The only thing I did read was, I read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, obviously. You you know, because she talks a lot about, you said earlier, Ben, is about inaction is just as dangerous as the wrong action, you know, and she also talks about how the little things count, like small, little, teeny, tiny, dangerous molecules of dioxin. That was more influential as far as the environmental literature goes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for the candid.
I should say, I see he says about the structure of the book, but the structure of the book really came from the material itself. It came from the material that, just like I said, came from everywhere. It was like coming out my pores, and it was coming at me in milk crates and moldy boxes, and people just like mailing me random things. And so that's why the structure of the book is not like a normal structure of a book, because the material told that structure. It's a bit more of a river with a lot of tributaries.
Absolutely. Okay. And then we get another question. We got a question from Matt, who grew up in Bethpage, Long Island, the home of Grumman Aerospace, long before Northrop came along. I remember going to the town dump with my father in the early 70s and winding up on a mountain of garbage, literally a mountain. Do you think every factory town has this kind of thing lurking in its past?
Yes, I do, because a lot of these toxics are bioaccumulative and stay in, everybody on this call has them in them right now. They're bioaccumulative, and they the further up the food chain they go, the stronger they become. So I do not think that is in our past at all. And it's interesting because the economic developer of this town, Rumford, he was asked, they did a profile of me in the Maine Sunday Telegram, and they asked him what he thought about my book. This is before it came out, so he hadn't really read it, but he said, no, Kerri's book is about the past. And I was like, I don't think he knows anything about the way toxics work. They are never in our past. The body burden, we're carrying them.
I'll give it another 30 seconds to see if anyone has any lingering questions. But those are the teenager questions last.
Yeah, one thing I meant to ask Kerri was, what's the response been to the book in your hometown?
Yeah, one of the most common responses I received, well, a couple. One is mostly utmost support, and people have said to me, I feel so seen. And that was just really moving for me to hear. I mean, just even saying it really is moving to, not that I'm seeing them, but I think other people are seeing them. People are reading about these people and like, oh my God, you know, I mean, that's even what started this book. I was writing and people said, that's so interesting. I'm like, really? That's not interesting. I grew up there. It's not, but it was interesting to people. And they feel seen. And they also, the other thing that people are saying to me is that it's about time somebody wrote this story. So I have felt nothing but support so far, although the book just came out, we'll see. I mean, nobody in this book is a hero, nobody's a bad guy, even the mill. I mean, it's a lot more complex than binary good and bad, truth and, untruth. It's complicated. It's people's lives. And I think the only binary really is life and death in this, and of leaders who constantly make regulations that choose death over life. That's really the only binary, like sort of hard and fast, one or the other thing in this book. No gray area there. You die or you live. It's a nice way to end a thing. You're all gonna die. No, it's terrible.
And
almost everybody on this call too, which is amazing.
An honest and refreshing look at very serious issues that as you said, like aren't in our past. That's not how biotoxins and that whole experience works. And I think it's unfortunately timely always. And I'm deeply, I want to say thank you to both of you, Kerri, and to Ben, for a really enlightening conversation this evening. As I've said in the chat, and I will say again, you can support Kerri and her important work by buying the book from Greenlight. You can order it online, or you can come into our stores Tuesdays through Saturdays and come get it. We're really deeply grateful for the type of people it take to do this kind of light shining work. And it was really our pleasure to host this evening.
Do we have to leave? We didn't read any of Ben's book, and I encourage you all to.
Yeah, read the excerpt you want to read. Yeah, please.
I'm going to read something. Everybody stick around. I see one person left. Hang on. Because if you have not read this book, I'm reading something. Here's Kerri reading Ben. I'm going to read this, and then you can all go home or go have dinner. He's talking about Ted Cruz in Iowa. It's like one of my favorite things. The Cruz happy face looks more like a pursed mouth grimace of constipation, top lip pulling a sort of widow's peak hood over his front teeth, while the rest of his mouth retracts to show rows of tiny possum teeth. And so it goes throughout the action plan litany: stern face, stern, smiley, like a cheap lenticular toy you'd find in a box of Cracker Jack. And certain lights from select angles, Cruz's unusual features add up to something close to handsomeness. And if the light falls just right, he even has a touch of old-time Hollywood dash. The swoony, borderline, effeminate prettiness of Rudolph Valentino, that same trace of Latin exoticism. It's most apt to happen on TV, Cruz showing up best in makeup in a sharp blue suit, all those high-tech studio lights aimed just so. In person, there's a schlumpy fleshiness to him, a blurring of definition in his face and neck, the little knob of his chin dangling like a boiled quail egg. His skin reads soft, smooth, the skin of an avid indoorsman, and several inches of schlump are revealed at his waist when he's not buttoned up in a jacket. That's the best description of anything I've ever heard.
Well, thank you
for all sitting around to hear that. Right. Please buy this book because it's so relevant to this election. It was written in the last election, but he could just like replace it with dates and it would be the same thing, I think.
Thank you, Kerri. Thank you for writing your book. And Jackie, thank you for hosting. And everybody buy a book from Greenlight. It's a wonderful store. It's
not ours, somebody else's.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's we look forward to seeing you soon, and thank you again, Kerri and Ben, for a delightful discussion between the two of you, and also such joy in sharing each other's works. It's really a wonderful way to end the evening.
Thank you.
Bleak, some bleak topics.
I know.
The joy.
I'm smiling the whole time. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Oh, thanks very much, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. I'll talk to you soon, Ben.
All right. Bye-bye, Kerri.
Bye. Thank you.